Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the second week of our series, All In. The heartbeat of All In is that we would grow to become mature, majestic trees with roots that reach deep down into the ground, nourished by the water below, a trunk that reaches up to the heavens to declare the glory and the goodness of God, and branches that fold out and provide food, shade, and shelter for others. It's this beautiful picture of the multi-generational influence our lives can have as we go all in for the next generation, our community, and our world. This week we were joined by Pastor Jason Small, who serves as the District Superintendent for the Western District of the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. Pastor Jason talked about how Lake Point has personally impacted his life. He shared stories from when he and his wife were just starting out in ministry, young and experienced, and honestly struggling financially. He said at one point their annual salary was only $13,500 and that they were trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And in that season, Lake Point stepped in, not just with words, but with real tangible support. We prayed for them, encouraged them, and even threw them a baby shower that provided everything they needed for their daughter's early years. And then later, when they planted a church and had no salary at all, this church once again came alongside them and helped launch their ministry forward. People came to faith because of that support. His point in sharing all of that was to say, Lake Point has been all in for a long time. And what you may not always see is how far that impact reaches. The generosity and faithfulness of this church have rippled into other communities, other churches, and countless lives. From there, Pastor Jason zoomed out and talked about how we're part of something bigger, this wider movement of churches across Canada that are focused on mission, planting churches, reaching people, and seeing lives transformed. He talked about new churches launching, people encountering Jesus for the first time, and how even today there are people walking into church for the very first time in their lives. And he reminded us that's why we do what we do. From there, Pastor Jason asked the question, what does it actually mean to go all in? He said for him, it comes down to this idea of calling, living the life God has created you to live. He pointed us to a story in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, where Jesus calls Nathanael. And what's interesting about Nathanael is that his first reaction isn't faith, it's skepticism. When he hears about Jesus being from Nazareth, he basically says, can anything good come from there? But instead of dismissing him, Jesus meets him right in that place. He says, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree. And something about that moment hits Nathanael deeply. In an instant, he moves from doubt to belief. He recognizes who Jesus is and decides to follow him completely, fully, all in. Pastor Jason used that moment to unpack what it looks like to grow into the calling God has for our lives, and he gave us 4 key truths about God's calling. First, God's call is a patient call. He pointed out that Jesus could have easily brushed Nathanael off. Nathanael had just made a pretty dismissive comment, but Jesus doesn't reject him. He stays with him. And Pastor Jason said that's how God deals with us too. Some of us feel like we've maybe disqualified ourselves, maybe because of mistakes we've made, things we've said, or seasons where we've drifted. We might even ask the same kind of question Nathanael did, can anything good come from my life? But the reality is, God's call doesn't get canceled because of our failures. Pastor Jason shared his own story of being the goof-off kid growing up, the one who got into trouble, the one people didn't expect much from. He even talked about how people laughed when someone suggested he might actually go into ministry. And yet, here he is. His point was simple. You cannot mess up your life so badly that God cannot still use it. God is patient, he keeps calling, he keeps inviting, and no matter how far you feel you've gone, you're not beyond his reach. Second, Jason wanted to know that God's call is personal. Jesus doesn't just give Nathanael a general invitation, he speaks directly into his life. He says, I saw you. Pastor Jason explained that the fig tree was often a place where people would sit and wrestle with life's big questions, truth, purpose, meaning. And so when Jesus says that he's not just making a random observation, he's saying, I saw you in your searching, I saw you in your questions. And that's powerful because it means God sees us in those same moments. He sees what we're going through. He sees the things we don't talk about. He sees the doubts, the fears, the struggles, the quiet questions that we carry. Pastor Jason even shared a story about his wife going through a difficult season, feeling like she had stepped out in obedience, but ended up in a place where she felt unseen and uncertain. And in a completely unexpected moment, a stranger approached her and simply said, I just felt like God wanted me to tell you, I see you. That moment for her changed everything. And that's the heart of his point, is that God's call isn't generic, it's deeply personal. He knows your story, he knows your name, and he speaks into your life right where you are. The third thing is that God's call is powerful. Jesus tells Nathanael, "You will see greater things than this." And that's exactly what happens. Nathanael goes on to witness miracles, transformation, and the movement of God in ways he never could have imagined. Pastor Jason said, when you step into your calling, you step into a life where God begins to move in powerful ways, not because of who you are, but because of what he's able to do through you. You begin to see things you never thought possible. Lives changed, people healed, hope restored. And that's what, makes going all in worth it. You're not just living an ordinary life anymore. You're stepping into something bigger than yourself. Finally, the fourth thing is that God's call is purposeful. He said, when you step into what God has for you, you begin to discover your purpose. And he told this story about a woman in his church who felt like her life didn't matter. She had gone through a lot and she didn't believe God could use her. She didn't feel like she had anything to offer. But eventually, Pastor Jason convinced her to help with a kids program, something she didn't even enjoy doing at first. And slowly, things started to change, to shift. She kept showing up, she kept serving, and over time her heart softened. The kids began to love her, the community began to know her, and what started as reluctant obedience turned into something beautiful. She became known as Mrs. Sunday, and one day she said, for the first time in my life, I feel like I have purpose. And Pastor Jason said, that's what happens when you go all in. You discover why you were created. He wrapped everything up with a challenge. Don't settle for just living a comfortable life. Don't let your story just be about getting a job, building a life, and getting by. Instead, live a life worthy of the calling God has placed on you, because your life was meant for more. He said the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you discover why you were born. And that second day, that moment of discovering your purpose, comes when you choose to go all in with Jesus. He didn't sugarcoat it either. He said following Jesus doesn't mean life will be easier. In fact, it may get harder, but it will be deeper, it will be fuller, and in the end, it will be worth it. And so the invitation was simple. Give your life fully to Jesus, step into the calling he has for you, go all in. Because when you do, you'll begin to see just how much God can do with a life that's fully surrendered to him. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. Let's continue to go all in together.